Facebook fan page and our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep. Welcome to the African History Network show. It is Tuesday, September 28th, 2021, and we are live. So we have a jam-packed show. There's a new study out that deals with looking at crime in 2020 in the U.S. And these are coming from FBI statistics. And we see that murders and manslaughter rose almost 30% in 2020 across the country, with more slayings being committed by guns. We also see that overall violent crime rose 5.6%. Now, in Detroit, in WXYZ Channel 7 has reporting on this also. In Detroit, we see that in Michigan, we see homicides increased 31% in the state of Michigan. Nationally, homicides were up nearly 30%, 2020 compared to 2019, up 31% in Michigan. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. What's behind those trends? New York Times has an article, murder spiked in 2020 in cities across the United States. The year-to-year increase in homicides from 2019 was the largest since national record keeping began in 1960, the largest since national record keeping began in 1960. So there's a good article from the Washington Post about this, as well as New York Times. And there's some contributing factors to this as well. Number one, we know during 2016, we know during 2020, a lot of the country was shut down for the majority, largely shut down for the majority of the year due to COVID-19. So criminologists and police officials have been studying possible explanations for the sudden sharp increase in killings, from societal changes because of the coronavirus to changes in policing to increased gun sales. So they're contributing factors. Okay, so we'll talk about this. Then, on yesterday's show, we dealt with R. Kelly being convicted in a Brooklyn federal court on all 9 counts, 1 count of racketeering, 8 counts of interstate sex trafficking. And we've been covering the trial many days here on the show, not every single day, but many days here on the show. And I've talked about yesterday, we talked about adultification bias in African-American girls and how stereotypes regarding African-American girls, stereotypes regarding African-American women are oftentimes projected onto African-American girls. Okay. And African-American girls are deemed as needing less protection, as knowing more about adult topics and knowing more about sex than young white girls of comparative ages. Well, we're going to, in the second part of the show, we're going to deal with R. Kelly, the Jezebel Stereotype, Hypersexualization, and Adultification Bias in Black girls. Okay, we're going to talk about this because all this is connected. All this is connected. Now, I'm not saying R. Kelly created this or R. Kelly started this. No, we're going to deal with some of this history of sexual abuse of African-American women, which goes back to slavery. Okay, there's a historical context behind this. So he just benefited from a lot of this historical context. He's a victim also because, as I said before, he's the victim of molestation when he was a child, so he needs psychological help. So we're going to talk about this as well. R. Kelly, the Jezebel Stereotype, Hypersexualization, Adultification Bias in Black girls. And, and then also we'll deal with how media can help expose sexual misconduct. I was watching the Black News Channel, and they did a segment with Dream Hampton. Dream Hampton was the producer of Surviving R. Kelly. And they talked about stereotypes of African-American women that allow this type of abuse to take place, regardless of whether it's R. Kelly or not. But the role media can play in helping expose sexual misconduct. All right. And we know that it's both African-American women and girls and boys and men who are sexually abused and exploited as well. All right. So on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct your own behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man or woman's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his or her actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the African History Network show. We deal with current events and history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828. To sign up for our email newsletter. Also, you can visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, to sign up for the email newsletter there as well. Be sure to register for the 10-week online course that I teach on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. We have that at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And we do the class live. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch it over and over again. Okay. So as soon as you register, you can go back and watch last Saturday's class. All right. I want to jump into this first topic here. So the report came out on Monday, September 27th. From FBI statistics, killings soared nearly 30% in 2020, with more slayings committed with guns. Okay. Killings soared nearly 30% in 2020, with more slayings committed with guns. We're going to go to clip one, Shakita from NBC News. Let's go to clip one, please. Okay, take it off mute. All right, killings in it, just press play when it's ready. Killings in the United States jumped nearly 30% in 2020, according to FBI data released on Monday, September 27th. That indicates a growing number of gun-related slayings during the pandemic. The FBI said murder and manslaughter rose 29.4%, the largest one-year increase since the federal government began.
FBI data.
Let it play.
In America, the numbers show that between 2019 and 2020, violent crime in the U.S. increased by more than 5.5%. But property crimes, however, dropped by 7.8%. NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams is here to dig into those numbers with us. Pete, first off, what are some of the key takeaways here, and what jumped out at you?
The two things I think that are the main takeaways here are that for the first time in 4 years, the number of violent crimes increased. That has been steadily going down. Property crimes have been going down for almost 2 decades, but that's a surprise. But the other one is the murder rate. The number of the volume of murder and non-negligent manslaughter is up almost 30%. Now, that is the biggest one-year jump since the FBI began analyzing this data for what it calls its uniform crime reports. About half the victims, the data shows, were at home. So this is not necessarily an increase driven primarily by street crime. And of course, the FBI doesn't give any data on why this is happening. This is simply an analysis. This is simply a gathering of the numbers. And criminologists can go through and compare cities and compare year to year and compare offenses, but it doesn't look at the causes. But we know what some of the causes are. It's the unemployment driven by COVID. It's the fact that more people are simply at home. It's a large number of guns that are out there. There are many factors that are driving this, but it's just the numbers themselves that are the biggest surprise.
Surprise indeed. And that
okay, pause it right
alone
there.
is
Pause it
pretty
right there.
interesting.
We're coming up on a break. Pause it right there. All right, we're coming up on a break. We're going to continue this on the other side of the break. Listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, stand by. Back from break in 4 minutes. All right, let's see here. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Back from break in 4 minutes. Okay, we've got Becky. Saw Becky at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History Sunday. We have Becky, Shawnee, John Ray, Hugh, Miss Brian, Malik, Margaret. All right, stand by. Back from break in 2 minutes. Back from break in 1 minute. Stand by. Stand by. All right, stand by, everybody. Okay, about to come back from break.
Michael Imhotep and the African History Network show. We deal with current events in history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Unfortunately, many people confuse what racism is. Racism is a power structure. It was laws and policies that put us in this predicament. It's going to be laws and policies that take us out. So when you control the radius of a man or woman's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his or her actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know.
We have it all on 910 AM Superstation. 910, the Superstation, Detroit's only African-American talk radio.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. All right, stand by, stand by. Hold on, we lost our connection. Yeah, I'm calling back into the station now. All right, stand by. We're trying to reestablish our connection. Oh man, come on! What the hell is wrong with this? All right, stand by. We lost our connection to the radio station. I'm trying to call the station back. Oh, come on, man. What the hell is wrong with Skype? Stand by. What the hell like this? All right, stand by. My Skype's not working. Okay, all right, guys, we're having technical difficulties. Skype went out on me, and Skype's not working now. I can't call back in on Skype, so I'm calling back in on my cell phone. So we're going to continue here. The African History Network show. We were broadcasting, and everything just cut out on me. All right. So right before the break, we were talking about the report that came out from the FBI on Monday, September 27th. New York Times, Washington Post has articles dealing with this, how the increase in murders and manslaughters increased 29.4% in 2020 over 2019. And I want to look at the article here from the Washington Post. FBI killings soared nearly 30% in 2020 with more slayings committed with guns. Killings in the United States jumped nearly 30% in 2020, according to FBI data released Monday that indicates a growing number of gun-related slayings during the pandemic. The FBI said murder and manslaughter rose 29.4%, the largest one-year increase since the federal government began compiling national figures in the 1960s. Now, that historic increase has been known for some time and has sparked concern from police officials and prosecutors. But the FBI's release of data compiled from thousands of law enforcement agencies formally confirms the trend. Okay, the FBI's release of data compiled from thousands of law enforcement agencies formally confirms the trend. Now, overall, violent crime rose 5.6% in 2020. Okay, Overall violent crime rose 5.6% in 2020, while property crimes fell 7.8%, the FBI said. Assaults increased 12%, okay, in 2020 over 2021. Now, trying to figure out what's behind the trends, criminologists and police officials have been studying possible explanations for the sudden sharp increase in killings from societal changes because of the coronavirus, because for majority of 2020, a lot of cities and things like this were largely shut down. You had COVID-19 restrictions, stay-at-home orders in various states, etc. So far this year in 2021, officials are seeing a further increase in homicides, but not as pronounced as last year. Now, the FBI data also shows how much killing in America is fueled by shootings. The FBI data also shows how much killing in America is fueled by shootings. Guns accounted for 73% of homicides in 2019, okay? Guns accounted for 73% of homicides in 2019, but that increased to 76% of homicides in 2020. Gun killings rose 55% in Houston, Texas, from 221 in 2018 to 343 killings by gun in 2020 in Houston, Texas. Overall, the city of Houston, Texas saw more than 400 killings last year. Now, overall, however, crime is still well below the historic highs reached in the 1990s. Okay, so regardless of what Republicans want to say, and they just want to say all across the country crime is out of control, things like this, they're still well below the crime in the 1990s. And in many cities, including Washington, D.C., New York, and Chicago, the number of killings is still far below the record high tolls from nearly 30 years ago. Justin Nix, NIX, is an associate professor of criminology and criminal justice at the University of Nebraska in Ohio. He said homicides jumped almost everywhere while overall crime was down, so there's no real surprise in this. Homicides jumped almost everywhere while overall crime was down, so there's no real surprise in this. Now, he said that the most likely culprits for the sharp spike in killings are twofold. The pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, and what he called a police legitimacy crisis. A police legitimacy crisis brought on by the videotaped killing last year of George Floyd by a police officer, by Derek Chauvin, and the killing of George Floyd by Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Okay, so he's identifying two likely culprits, sharp spike in killings: the coronavirus pandemic, and then also what he calls a police legitimacy crisis. Now, the incident and others have caused many people to trust police less, making them less willing to call for help or provide information to investigators about killings, Justin Nix said. He added that the effect is magnified when officers, quote unquote, depolice by pulling back from patrol and other duties in the face of public criticism. On top of that, he said that the data suggests there may be more people carrying guns and using guns in public spaces, leading to more killings. So we know there were a lot of gun sales in 2020 during the coronavirus and stay-at-home orders, things like this. Republican and Democratic elected officials disagree on what is causing the increase in homicides after years of decline and how to stop it. So, conservatives blame Democratic-run cities for what they say are overly restrictive policies placed on police departments. But now they don't say anything about Republican-run cities in cities that have Republicans are in control of, where you have increases in crime. Also, they don't talk about that at all. But conservatives blame Democratic-run cities for what they say are overly restrictive policies placed on police departments. The Biden administration faults the easy availability of guns as a prime reason for more deaths, and the Justice Department is trying to stem the violence by cracking down on illegal gun trafficking. All right. The disturbing crime data comes as the FBI is pushing the nation's roughly 18,000 state and local law enforcement agencies to change how they provide information to calculate national figures and trends. Okay, so read the rest of this article here. You'll probably hear more about this. And tomorrow we'll talk about Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina saying that the reason why he backed out of the deal with Democrats dealing with the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act was because Democrats were pushing for defund the police, and that's not the case. He lied. And even police organizations have come out and have insinuated that, largely they supported a lot of what was in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And, it wasn't... They are saying that he is mischaracterizing what was they're saying he's mischaracterizing what happened. Okay, there was an article from theweek.com, and we'll talk about this tomorrow. The Griot has one, but there was one from theweek.com. I know Roland Martin did a piece today on Roland Martin Unfiltered. I sent Roland this article here from I sent him this article here from theweek.com. Let's pull this one up quickly. We're going to go to clip 2, Shakita from WXYZ Channel 7. So just get that queued up, please. This one here from theweek.com. This article came out today, Tuesday, September 28th. I just want to show you this to show you how Senator Tim Scott is lying. Largest U.S. police group appears to counter Senator Tim Scott's argument that Democrats sought to defund police in reform negotiations. Largest U.S. police group appears to counter Senator Tim's argument that Democrats sought to defund police in reform negotiations. Okay. A pair of police organizations. So Senator Tim Scott, Republican, South Carolina, has suggested that his police reform talks with Senator Cory Booker and Representative Karen Bass, both Democrats, fell apart primarily because Democrats sought to defund the police by making departments ineligible for funding if they failed to meet certain criteria, But a pair of prominent police organizations, the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the Fraternal Order of Police, the FOP, appeared to push back against Senator Tim Scott's argument in a statement on Tuesday, September 28th. Though the senator was not mentioned by name, they said, quote, despite some media reports, at no point did any legislative draft propose defunding the police. In fact, the legislation specifically provided additional funding to assist law enforcement agencies in training, agency accreditation, and data collection initiatives. Okay, end quote. Now, those provisions would have helped strengthen law enforcement, improve community police engagement, quote, without compromising management and officers' rights, authorities, and legal protections, end quote. The statement continues. Read the rest of this. Senator Tim Scott, the rest of this. Okay. Largest U.S. police group appears to counter the Tim Scott's argument that Democrats sought to defund police in reform negotiations. Okay, he got caught. He's lying. We'll talk about this some more tomorrow. All right, now I want to go to let's see here, and I got to pull this up because we lost our connection through Skype. So WXYZ Channel 7 here in Detroit, they have a story dealing with Michigan and the FBI crime statistics as well. This piece here is from Tuesday, September 28th, WXYZ Channel 7 here in Detroit. And just a second here. So if we look at the numbers here in Michigan, FBI data shows Michigan homicides up 31%. Okay, and we're going to pull this up here. All right, let's see here. Yeah, FBI data shows homicides in Michigan up 31%. The FBI just released crime stats for the year 2020 with some concerning results. Nationally, homicides were up nearly 30% compared to 2019 and up 31% in Michigan, making the largest annual increase in over 3 decades. Now, roughly 44% of the state of Michigan's homicides occurred in the city of Detroit. Roughly 44% of the state of Michigan's homicides took place in the city of Detroit. Shakita, let's go to this clip here from WXYZ Channel 7.
FBI is releasing the alarming results of crime stats for 2020.
Homicides were up nearly 30% across the country last year, and there were more than 1.2 million violent crimes.
Here in Michigan, there was a 31% spike in homicides. This marks the largest annual increase in more than 3 decades.
Well, tonight, 7 Action News reporter Brett Cast is getting an in-depth breakdown of these numbers and the push for different results moving forward.
Well, most of the blame for this rise in violence is being placed on the pandemic. And Chief James White from the Detroit Police Department says there are also other factors leading to this rise in violence and other solutions they're hoping to implement.
You know, the rise in violent crime is real and is troubling.
For the first time since 2016, the city of Detroit reported over 300 homicides in the FBI's annual crime report, with 328 in 2020.
There's an uptick in violent crime around the country as well as in the city of Detroit. There are a number of factors that contribute to that uptick.
The pandemic is taking a lot of the blame, but Detroit Police Chief James White says there's also been a rise in illegal guns on the street and a rise in cases of mental health.
When you mix illegal weapons and impulse decision-making, generally speaking, you've got yourself a pretty big problem.
Nationwide, homicides were up nearly 30% since last year, and in the state of Michigan, up 31%. It's the largest year-to-year increase in at least 3 decades.
I think anytime your homicide rate goes up 30%, that's an alarming statistic.
Andy Bartnoak is a retired FBI agent who oversaw the Violent Crime Task Force in the Detroit field office. He says the agency will take a hard look at these numbers.
They'll look at the data, and then they'll determine where can they best use their resources, whether it's to form other task force groups, where it's to fund other police initiatives, to combat the surge in the homicide rate.
On the streets of Detroit, Chief White says the department continually monitors the data. But so far in 2021, the city is on track for another rise in homicides, with 13 more today than the state last year.
We look at our data every single day. We brief on our data. And we have seen some monikers of success. I mean, but nothing to celebrate.
It's a nationwide problem having a major impact here in Metro Detroit. Law enforcement agencies say they're focused on a solution, but need help to get there.
It's the police, and it's the community, and it's our stakeholders, and it's our clergy, and it's our courts. And I mean, we have to work together at this.
I think everybody works in concert with each other, and we'll start to see these rates go down again.
Along with that rise in homicides, there was a roughly 5.6% increase in violent crime and a nearly 8% decrease in property crime.
Here in Detroit.
I'm Brett Cass, 7 Action
James
News.
White,
Brett, thank you. And you can read the FBI crime stats report for 2020 on our website, WXYZ.com.
Generally speaking, you've got yourself a pretty big problem. generally speaking, you've got yourself a pretty big
When
problem.
the power goes
Check out
out,
this article
put your
here
trust
from
in the Generac experts at Oak Electric.
check out this
month only,
piece here
get a new
from
Generac.
WXYZ Channel 7. FBI data shows Michigan homicides up 31% in 2020. That's at WXYZ.com, WXYZ.com. All right. So I want to go to, we're going to switch gears really quickly here. Let's see how we're going to do this. Okay. So I was watching the Black News Channel today, and they did a segment. They talked to Dream Hampton. They talked to Dream Hampton, who was a producer of Surviving R. Kelly. All right. And we're going to switch gears here. I want to go to this segment here. We're going to go to clip 3, Shakita from NBC Nightly News. Okay, in just a second. I want to talk something, and we may have to continue this conversation tomorrow. I want to do with R. Kelly, the Jezebel Stereotype, hypersexualization, and adultification bias in Black girls. Now, we talked about some of these themes throughout the R. Kelly trial. And we talked about a little bit yesterday's show as well. I tried to play the clip from NBC Nightly News yesterday just to recap everything that happened in the guilty verdict. It wasn't playing, it's working now. So hold on, we're going to go to that in just a second here. But this adultification bias deals with when stereotypes of African-American women are projected onto African-American girls, okay? And African-American girls are perceived to be less innocent, more independent, need less protection, know more about adult topics, and know more about sex at a younger age than white girls of the same age, okay? Which leaves them vulnerable to things like sexual exploitation, molestation, human trafficking, etc. This has a deep historical context. Yesterday, I talked about the Jim Crow Museum at Ferris State University that Dr. David Pilgrim runs, and you can check out their information at ferris.edu, Ferris, ferris.edu. Is at Ferris State University. And they have the Jim Crow Museum there that deals with a history of these negative stereotypical images of African Americans. Okay, and there's a section on their website. There's a section that deals with the Jezebel Stereotype. The Jezebel Stereotype. Let's go to this clip here from NBC Nightly News dealing with R. Kelly being found guilty. Okay, let's go to this clip, Shakita.
It's a verdict prosecutors say was nearly 30 years in the making. R. Kelly guilty of racketeering and sex trafficking. The man who wrote the Grammy-winning 90s anthem, I Believe I Can Fly, now facing decades behind bars.
Today's guilty verdict forever brands R. Kelly as a predator who used his fame and fortune to prey on the young, the vulnerable, and the voiceless.
The verdict caps a 5-week-long trial with often graphic testimony. Victims described being locked in rooms for days for not following Kelly's rules, like not asking for permission to go to the bathroom or making eye contact with other men. Geronda Pace, who appeared in the docuseries Surviving R. Kelly, was just 16 years old when she said she was abused by the pop star.
The breaking point for me was when Rob slapped me and he choked me until I blacked out.
The racketeering charge normally used to convict mafia bosses, allowing the government to introduce sexual abuse allegations outside the statute of limitations. At the center of the case, pop star Aaliyah, who died tragically in a plane crash. One witness said she walked in on Kelly and the then 13 or 14-year-old Aaliyah engaged in a sex act. The majority of the victims, young Black girls and boys, at the time of the abuse. The former assistant district attorney who tried Bill Cosby believes this trial could be a turning point.
These were decades worth of tears that these women have been crying, but at least now they are having the opportunity to be heard. They're able to testify and be credibly believed.
1 in 4 Black girls are sexually abused before age 18. Few go to the authorities. The defense portrayed the accusers in this case as opportunists who wanted money and fame themselves.
You saw witness after witness is giving 3, 4, 5 different versions as to what they said happened here.
The jury wasn't swayed, deliberating less than 9 hours total. Guilty on all counts.
To the victims in this case, your voices were heard and justice was finally served.
Stephanie, R. Kelly has been behind bars for the last couple of years. What happens next for him?
Well, Lester, R. Kelly is going to stay behind bars. He has his sentencing hearing on May 4th, where he faces 10 years to life.
All right.
And he has multiple upcoming trials on both state
So that's
and
from
federal
NBC
charges.
Nightly News. He has multiple upcoming trials as well. There's one in this one was in the Chicago area. There's another one coming up. So you're going to hear more about this also. Okay, now very quickly here, and we may have to do part 2 of this tomorrow. You know, yesterday we talked some about this article here. This is from HuffingtonPost.com. This is from 2007. Deals with the study from Georgetown Law's Center on Poverty and Inequality. Black girls are viewed as less innocent than white girls starting at age 5. Black girls are viewed as less innocent than white girls starting at age 5. It deals with adultification bias. And it talks about the study called Girlhood Interrupted, the erasure of Black girls' childhood. And the report shows that adults believe Black girls seem older than white girls of the same age and think Black girls need less nurturing, less protection, less support and comfort than white girls. The study also found that people assume Black girls are more independent, know more about adult topics, and I cannot stress this enough, know more about sex than young white girls. Know more about sex than young white girls. Now, there's a historical context to this. If we look at the Jezebel Stereotype from the Jim Crow Museum at Ferris State University, and Dr. David Pilgrim is the curator here who runs the Jim Crow Museum. They have a whole section there dealing with the Jezebel Stereotype. This goes back to slavery. The portrayal of Black women as lascivious by nature is an enduring stereotype. The descriptive words associated with this stereotype are singular in their focus, seductive and worldly, beguiling, tempting, and lewd. Historically, white women as a category were portrayed as models of self-respect, self-control, and modesty, even sexual purity. But African women were often portrayed as innately promiscuous, even predatory. This depiction of African women, Black women, is signified by the name Jezebel. Now, K-Sue Jewell in 1993, a contemporary sociologist, conceptualized the Jezebel as a tragic mulatto, quote, thin lips, long straight hair, slender nose, thin figure, and fair complexion. Now, this conceptualization is too narrow. It is true that the tragic mulatto and Jezebel stereotypes share the reputation of being sexually seductive, and both are antithetical to the desexualized stereotype of the Mammy caricature, because they have a whole information on the Mammy caricature as well. Also read the book by Donald Bogle, Toms, Mammies, Coons, and Bucks, that deals with all these stereotypical images of African Americans in movies and TV shows. Okay, Donald, that's another book by Donald Bogle. We talked about the encyclopedia, Black and White Television by Donald Bogle, which is an encyclopedia of African Americans in movies and TV shows. We talked about on yesterday's show, we talked about this book, Blacks in American films and television, an illustrated encyclopedia by Donald Bogle, but he also has the other book dealing with Mams, Bucks, Toms, and Coons, okay, which deals with all the history of all these stereotypical images. All right, now, if we go back to this piece here quickly, so the to the desexualized mammy character, nevertheless, it is a mistake to assume that only or even mainly fair complexion Black women were sexually objectified by the larger American society. From the early 1630s to present, African American women of all shades have been portrayed as hypersexual, quote unquote, bad Black girls, hypersexual bad Black girls. Now, K-Sue Jewell's conceptualization is based on a kernel of historic truth. Many of the slavery era Africans sold into prostitution were mulattoes, okay, mixed race, white and African, mixed race. Also, freeborn, light-skinned Black women sometimes became the willing concubines of wealthy white Southerners. This system, called placage, P-L-A-C-A-G, not exactly sure how to pronounce it, involved a formal arrangement for the white suitor customer to financially support the Black woman and her children in exchange for her long-term sexual services. The white men often met the Black women at quadroon balls, which was a genteel sex market. Quadroon balls, and these were the mixed race women. The belief that Blacks are sexually lewd predates the institution of slavery in America. European travelers to Africa found scantily clad native Africans. This semi-nudity was misinterpreted by Europeans who did not understand African culture in general, even though Africans were in Europe. They were dealing with the African Moors for hundreds of years, but they did not understand European culture, misinterpreted the semi-nudity as lewdness coming from a European cultural paradigm, and they did not understand African culture to be able to understand it, and they judged African people based upon European standards coming from a European cultural paradigm. Europeans locked into the racial ethnocentrism of the 17th century saw African polygamy and African tribal dances as proof of Africans' uncontrolled sexual lust. Okay, we're out of time here on 910 AM Superstation WFDF. Those watching on Facebook and YouTube, keep watching. We're going to keep going for a few more minutes. We're going to do part 2 of this tomorrow because I got some more information here. This is all within a historical context. This is bigger than R. Kelly. Okay, this is all where he should be held accountable, absolutely. But this is within a historical context of white supremacy and racism. Right now, let's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Peace. Okay, let's keep going. We'll keep going for a few more minutes here. I got more information. We're going to do this tomorrow because I want people in Detroit on 910 AM Superstation WFDF to be able to hear this. We're only on the radio for an hour. All right. This is much bigger. Okay. Sarah Bartman, absolutely. Sartajay, Sarah Bartman was Khoisan. And Sarah Bartman, she ended up becoming a prostitute. See, this is why understanding this history is why I came out so strongly against the song WAP in the video WAP by Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. But if you go watch the videos that I did, the majority of my criticism was against a white corporation named called Atlantic Records that financed the song and video and is using 2 women of African descent to promote prostitution. And the phrase in the song, "There's some whores in this house," is repeated about 79 times, and everybody in the house is of African descent, except for Kylie Jenner, who's white. We don't understand our history enough to fight back when they mistreat us. We don't understand when we're being disrespected. So this is why I say what you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Only Negroes would allow some BS like that to take place. Other people wouldn't allow something like that to happen. Other people who your history and culture gives you your self-esteem, your self-development, your self-worth. It gives you your VIPs, your values, your interests, and your principles. every other ethnic group in this country, for the most part, they have their history and culture intact. They fight back when people dehumanize them like that. They fight back when people dehumanize them like that. Okay, let's continue here. All right, so Europeans were fascinated by African sexuality. William Bosman described the black woman on the coast of Guinea as fire, West Africa, as fiery and warm and so much hotter than the men. William Smith described African women as hot constitutioned ladies who are continually contriving stratagems how to gain a lover. Now, we also know that in Europe, before Europeans were worshiping the white Mary and Jesus, they were worshiping the African Madonna and child, the black Madonna and child, coming from Asar, Set, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus. They still have the statues of the black Madonna and child in Poland, in churches in Poland and Russia and Italy. They were worshiping the black Madonna and child before coming out of the Dark Ages. And when you start having a rise of European powers coming out of the Dark Ages in late 1400s, 1500s, and they're going out exploring and conquering other people's lands, extracting the mineral wealth. You have Juan Ponce de Leon, you have Christopher Columbus, Hernan Cortez. Europe is rebuilding itself. And as you have a rise in European powers, you start having a rise in the dominance of the European phenotype. And a lot of these traditional African figures get reinterpreted as European figures. So Michelangelo paints the Sistine Chapel and uses his relatives as models for Adam and Eve and for God and things like this. Okay, you're gonna have a reinterpretation, and you're gonna have a dominance in the European phenotype. Now, the black genesis of anti-black sexual archetypes emerged from the writings of these and other Europeans. The black male or African male as a brute and potential rapist, the African woman as a Jezebel whore. The English colonists accepted the Elizabethan image of the lusty Moor, M-O-R, the Moor, because the African Moors were in Europe for hundreds of years, going to 711 AD in the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal. And we know the African Moors are intermixing with the European population. You got to read this book here, Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivan van Sertima, okay, which deals with the history of the Moors in medieval times and throughout Europe and Spain and Portugal and Italy and France and Germany and Austria. And then you look at Runoko Rashidi's book, and we know Runoko just passed away August 2nd. You look at Runoko's book, Black Star, The African Presence in Early Europe, and I've got that here somewhere. Right here. Black Star, The African Presence in Early Europe. And see, in this book, Runoko shows you photographs he's taken in Europe of statues of the Black Madonna and Child. Okay, this is page 90. You have him in Switzerland. He's showing Switzerland, Poland, Madrid, Spain, Luxembourg City, Luxembourg. So Europeans were worshiping Africans before the rise of white supremacy. And we're going to see all this get flipped around. That book is, for those who want to know, Black Star, The African Presence in Early Europe. This is one of the books I use in the first online course that I teach, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is one of the books I use in that class, as well as Golden Age of the Moor. This is one of the books I use in the class also. All right, let's continue here. Okay, so the English colonists accepted the Elizabethan image of the lusty Moor and used this and similar stereotypes to justify enslaving Africans. Okay, saying that they're heathens, they're pagans, etc., and dehumanizing these Africans. And we're going to see the way, because see, when the Moors go into Europe, a lot of these Europeans look at Moors as being almost superhuman. Okay, they're highly intelligent. They're introducing periodic tables and different types of foods, different types of musical instruments, the algebra, different surgical techniques, things like this. Okay. Now, in part, this was accomplished by arguing that blacks were subhumans, intellectually inferior, culturally stunted, morally undeveloped, underdeveloped, and animal-like sexually. And a lot of this has to do with preserving genetic white survival. The African Moors are intermixing into the European population all throughout Europe to varying degrees and changing the complexion of Europeans. Spain and Portugal probably get the brunt of it because it's right above Morocco where they're going in. It's right above Morocco, but even is going to happen to a certain extent in England, which is further away from Spain and Portugal. And if you look at King George III, King George III was the king that the 13 colonies are revolting against. Okay. King George III's wife was of African Moorish ancestry on his mother's side of the family. Okay. Queen Charlotte Sophia. There is a good article here. Which one is this one? Okay, so there's one from face-to-faceafrica.com dealing with Queen Charlotte Sophia. And the older the paintings that you see of her, the more African, the more Africoid her features. The older the paintings that you see of her, the more Africoid her features. The later the paintings, the more white she looks. Okay, it's not because the painting was dirty or anything like that. No, it was on purpose. Read this article here from face-to-faceafrica.com, remembering the first queen of England of African descent. Okay, now she may not be the first queen of England of African descent, because you had a lot of you had Africans in, you had Black Britons and things like this. You had Africans in England, in Great Britain, and they're intermixing into the European population. So you're going to have a lot of people who may pass for white or may look white, but they're of African ancestry. They have African ancestry in their family. But this is Queen Charlotte Sophia. This is a painting of her. And she was the wife of King George III. She was of African Moorish ancestry on at least her mother's side of the family. Here's another painting of her as well. Charlottesville, Virginia is named after Queen Charlotte Sophia, where they had the August 2017, where they had the Charlottesville race riot there. Okay. She's of African Moorish ancestry. Now, this is another depiction of her, but this is one that was later. She looks white. They have her looking white. She was, let's see, Queen Charlotte, Mary, hold on. So Queen Charlotte is the descendant of a Black branch of the Portuguese royal family, more specifically Alfonso III and his concubine Orana, O-U-R-A-N-A, a Black Moor. Read this article. It just gets deep into the history. Okay. In 13th century, Alfonso III seized the town named Faro, F-A-R-O, from the Moors, from the African Moors. He also demanded that the governor of Faro's daughter become his concubine. They birthed 3 children. Read this article here, remembering the first Queen of England of African descent. This is from face-to-faceafrica.com. So you're going to see even before this, even before the 1781, things like this, these Africans are in Europe and they're intermixing with the European population. So the mistake that people think is that when the transatlantic slave trade starts, this is when Europeans are first coming in contact with African people. No, they were fighting with the Moors for hundreds of years in Europe before the transatlantic slave trade starts, right around 1441 with the Portuguese. Okay, now let's go back to this article quickly here from this is from Ferris State University's Jim Crow Museum. This one deals with the Jezebel Stereotype. So in part, this was accomplished by arguing that blacks were subhumans, intellectually inferior, culturally stunted, morally underdeveloped, and animal-like sexually. Whites used racist and sexist ideologies. Let me see. Can you all see this? Is this large enough? Let me see if I can increase the size of this here. Okay. Whites use racist and sexist ideologies to argue that they alone were civilized and rational, but it was the African Moors who helped civilize the Europeans. See, all this stuff that we taught Europeans during 711 AD to 1492, January 2nd, 1492, the Moors lose control of their last stronghold in Spain, which was Granada. And then August 3rd, 1492, Columbus set sail on the Nina de Pinta and the Santa Maria. He has African Moors navigating some of his ships. He goes on 4 voyages, but the nautical instruments that Columbus is using is based upon technology that the Moors introduced into Europe. One of them is called the astrolabe. The astrolabe. Okay, all this stuff we taught them came back to kick us in the behind. So whites use racist and sexist ideologies to argue that they alone were civilized and rational, whereas Africans and other people of color were barbaric and deserved to be subjugated. The Jezebel stereotype was used during slavery as a rationalization for sexual relations between white men and black women, specifically white men and black women, which shows the dominance of white men. Now, some people could make the argument, because see, this is why you got to study chronology of history, because African men were having sex with white women. The Moors men were having sex with white women in Europe. Some could make the argument that because understanding this chronology of history, I argue that the transatlantic slave trade is a continuation of the wars and the conflicts between Europeans and African Moors. And the transatlantic slave trade is Europeans getting revenge on the African Moors for what happened in Europe. Because you see a continuation. It ain't like something just stops and then all of a sudden the transatlantic slave trade just comes out of nowhere. No, you can draw a straight line. You understand this chronology. And then some of the Moors from Spain are being kicked out of Spain, and they're being enslaved and taken into Spanish colonies and enslaved in Spanish colonies. And one of the things they're doing in some of these Spanish colonies is making it illegal for them to read and write. But it was the African Moors that taught a lot of these Europeans how to read and write hundreds of years prior to that. All this stuff was coming back on us, especially sexual unions involving slavers and slaves. Okay, so the Jezebel stereotype was used during slavery as a rationalization for sexual relations between white men and black women, especially sexual unions involving slavers, who would be white men largely, and slaves. Now, see, this is all tied to preserving genetic white survival, because as the Moors are intermixing with Europeans, the Moors are changing the complexion of Europeans throughout Europe. Many Europeans, not all of them, but many Europeans who are taking on a darker complexion. Europeans are taking on a darker complexion. Many of them who are of mixed race. So they intermix with, when they go into these, they conquer Jamaica and Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, and they go into these different foreign countries, and they conquer and intermix with the women there, and they see the offspring is no longer European. And having dealt with that for hundreds of years, they realize You got to put some measures in place to preserve genetic white survival. Otherwise, you can be genetically annihilated off the face of the earth. Because when you study the majority of these laws, now there are going to be some strange cases like in the 1600s in some of the colonies here in 13 colonies. There are going to be some strange cases. Like I saw one case, it was in it may have been 1670s or something like that. Equal Justice Initiative has an article about this, a white man being whipped for, I think he's having sex with a black woman or something like that. You some strange cases like that, but the majority of the punishment is going to be directed towards African men for having sex with white women. The majority of the punishment. You'll see exceptions. There are exceptions to the rule. But you're going to see these measures being put in place to preserve genetic white survival and lock African people largely out of obtaining land and resources and benefits and privileges, things like this. In the 13 colonies is not at the beginning. It develops over a period of time, because in 1619, you don't have codified slave laws in any of the 13 colonies. The first colony to have codified slave laws is going to be Massachusetts in 1641. They have a indentured servitude system. So those 28 odd Africans on the White Lion pirate ship that comes into Virginia, and we say those were the first slaves, or we'll have people say that, even though the Spanish were taking Africans into the territory we call South Carolina in 1526 and enslaving Africans then, and they're going to rise up and overthrow their oppressors and run away and disappear and go live with Native Americans is believed. You don't have codified slave laws come to different colonies at different times. It didn't just all take place just like that. The laws come to Virginia about 1661. They're going to hit the different colonies at different times, but you're going to have an indentured servitude system. So you're going to have Africans who are put into this type of indentured servitude system and serve for somewhere between 3 to 5 years, going to be released from that. They're free. A lot of them are going to be compensated with land. Many of them will go on to own land. Some of them go on to own indentured servants, both white and African. This is in the 1640s, 1650s, 1660s, even going into the 1670s, something, because the laws are being written at different times in different colonies, reversing and taking away rights and then making it illegal to for Africans to own property in different territories, etc., in different colonies, etc., at different times. Everything didn't just happen at one time in all the colonies. No, different colonies had different laws. When you deal with the 13 colonies, different colonies had different laws. Okay, if you read chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., if you read chapter 2, what the hell is that book? Right here. If you read chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., he goes through it and really breaks this down and shows this chronology. And then if you look in the back of the book, where they have dates in history, landmarks and milestones. If you look in the back, landmarks and milestones. This is the 6th edition, so we're looking at page 443, December 1641. Massachusetts became the first colony to give statutory recognition to slavery. Other colonies followed: Connecticut in 1650, Virginia 1661, Maryland 1663, New York and New Jersey 1664, South Carolina 1682, Rhode Island and Pennsylvania 1700, North Carolina 1750, Georgia in 1750. You had Africans who were still voting going into in different colonies, depends upon the colony and the law, going into 1730, 1740. So read this page 443 down here, 4th edition. There's other research you can do on this. There's other sources on this. But people think just slavery starts 1619, all this. No, it doesn't. Not in the 13 colonies. British 13 colonies. Spain is different. That's a different government. That's not how it evolved here. Chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower, Lerone Bennett Jr. breaks this down and lays out how this evolves. That's why this is such a crucial book. This is another book I use in my classes. This is such a crucial book. And one of the things he says in here, page 40, he says, of all the probable aspects of this situation, the oddest to modern blacks and whites is that white people did not seem to know that they were white. Because the term white, and then we talked about this in the movie Happy, the role of economics and development of civilization. The term white gets introduced largely into the British colonies, the 13 British colonies, about 1681. And that's after Bacon's rebellion of 1775 and 1776, led by Nathan Bacon. And this was a rebellion that unified enslaved Africans with white indentured servants because they realized that they were both being oppressed by the same, basically like 1%. Okay. And the term white is going to be, because before then, the people who we call white, they refer to as the Englishmen or the Christians or something like that. Okay. They may be referred to as the English or Scots or like the country they're from or what have you. But they're largely not referred to as white. That's going to be introduced largely after Bacon's rebellion as a way to break up that alliance between indentured European servants, English servants who were being mistreated, and enslaved Africans, to break up that alliance. Of all the improbable aspects of this situation, the oddest to modern blacks and whites is that white people did not seem to know that they were white. It appears from surviving evidence that the first white colonists had no concept of themselves as white people. The legal documents identified whites as Englishmen and or Christians. The word white, with its burden of arrogance and biological pride, developed late in the century, late in the 1600s, as a direct result of slavery and the organized debasement of blacks. The same point can be made from the other side of the line. For a long time in colonial America, there was no legal name to focus white anxiety. No legal name to focus white anxiety. The first blacks were called blackamoors, Moors, Negers, Negers, and Negars, Negars. The word negro, a Spanish and Portuguese term for black, did not come into general use in Virginia until the later part of the century, later part of the 17th century, which would be the 1600s. That's page 40 of Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., 6th edition. So that's why you have to study, understand a chronology of this history. Because the way we think this whole thing evolved and the way we think slavery evolved, all this is not what happened. Yeah, there were white slaves also. There were white. Now, here in this country, largely you have white indentured servants. But you had white slaves. You had Muslims enslaving white Christians. Okay, you're going to have a history of Muslims enslaving white Christians as well and selling them. Some of those Muslims are going to be African Moors also. There's Dr. Jose Pimenta Bay talks about this. I talked about this this article here. There's a deep history. This is why you can't just look at like Africans coming from Africa being enslaved and then think that's like the only history. Okay. There's an article here. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. There's an article here that sheds more light on white slavery in Eastern Europe. This is from Ohio State University. I think this is the right one I want. Yeah. This is from May 2004. Go read this one because I don't have a lot of time here. We'll have to continue this discussion on tomorrow's show. When Europeans were slaves, research suggests white slavery was much more common than previously believed, because the word slave referred to the Slavs, to the Slavics, Slavic nations, those Europeans being enslaved, Eastern Europeans being enslaved. This is from Ohio State University, and this talks about a research and a book at the time by Robert Davis, professor of history at Ohio State University. A new study suggests that 1 million or more European Christians were enslaved by Muslims in North Africa between 1530 and 1780, a far greater number than had been estimated before, a far greater number than had been estimated before. Most other accounts of slavery along the Barbary Coast did not try to estimate the number of slaves or only looked at the number of slaves in particular. Davis contrast is calculated between 1 million and 1.25 million European Christians were captured and forced to work in North Africa from the 16th to 18th centuries. Davis says it's useful to compare Mediterranean slavery to the transatlantic slave trade that brought Africans to the Americas. Let me see here. Okay, but go read this and then let's see. Okay, yeah, go read this. This deals with European Christians being enslaved by Muslims. Okay, so read this one also. When Europeans were slaves, research suggests white slavery was much more common than previously believed. Okay, let's continue here. Now, and there was, there were white women like in this country who were enslaved, like sex trafficking. That's why the Mann Act, interstate sex trafficking, the Mann Act, that goes back to about 1910. That was to protect white women that were being made sex slaves. Okay, so the Jezebel stereotype was used during slavery as a rationalization for sexual relations between white men and black women, especially sexual unions involving slavers and slaves. The Jezebel was depicted as a black woman with an insatiable appetite for sex. She was not satisfied with black men. The slavery era Jezebel, it was claimed, desired sexual relations with white men. And see, when you go and deal with African women during slavery, it was basically said that you could not rape a black woman. She generally had no rights. Now you're gonna have some that fight back, but the whole mindset was that in the mind of white people understanding white society at that time, generally, the mindset was you could not rape a black woman, and that keep in mind, African women were made to be breeders, and African girls made to be breeders during slavery. And that whole mindset is largely going to continue after slavery ends as well. The slavery era Jezebel, it was claimed, desired sexual relations with white men. Therefore, white men did not have to rape black women. James Redpath, 1859, an abolitionist, no less, wrote that the slave women were, quote, gratified by the criminal advances of the Saxons or Anglo-Saxons. This view is contradicted by Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist and former slave, who claimed that the slave woman is at the mercy of the fathers, sons, or brothers of her master. Frederick Douglass's account is consistent with the accounts of other former slaves. Henry Bibbs, 1849, Henry Bibbs's master forced a young slave to be his son's concubine. Later, Henry Bibb and his wife were sold to a Kentucky trader who forced Henry Bibb's wife into prostitution. Now, African slave women were property. Therefore, legally, they could not be raped. African slave women were property, therefore, legally, they could not be raped. Often, slave owners would offer gifts or promises of reduced labor if the African slave woman would consent to sexual relations. And there were instances where the slaver, the slave owner, and slaves shared sexual attraction. However, quote, the rape of a female slave was probably the most common form of interracial sex. D. Emilo and Friedman, 1988, page 102. They have citations here. A slave woman explained, quote, when he make me follow him in the bush, what used me to tell him no, he have strength to make me. At the same time, black men convicted of quote unquote, at the same time, black men convicted of raping white women were usually castrated, hanged, or both. People make decisions based on the options they have and the options they perceive. People make decisions based on the options they have and the options they perceive. The objective realities of slavery and the slave's subjective interpretations of the institution both led female slaves to engage voluntarily in sexual unions with whites, especially slavers, their sons, and their overseers. A slave who refused the sexual advances of her slaver risked being sold, beaten, raped, and having her husband or children sold. Many slave women conceded to sexual relations with whites, thereby reinforcing the belief that black women were lustful and available. Then you're also going to have sex farms during slavery, where you have African women as prostitutes. The idea that black women were naturally and inevitably sexually promiscuous was reinforced by several features of the slavery institution. Slaves, whether on the auction block or offered privately for sale, were often stripped naked and physically examined. In theory, this was done to ensure that they were healthy, able to reproduce, and equally important, to look for whipping scars, the presence of which implied that the slave was rebellious. In practice, the stripping and touching of slaves had a sexually exploitative, sometimes sadistic function. Nakedness, especially among women in the 18th and 19th centuries, implied lack of civility. Nakedness, especially among women in the 18th and 19th centuries, implied lack of civility. Morality, and sexual restraint, even when the nakedness was forced. African slaves of both sexes and ages often wore few clothes or clothes so ragged that their legs, thighs, and chests were exposed. Conversely, whites, especially white women, wore clothing over most of their bodies. The contrast between the clothing reinforced the belief that white women were civilized, modest, and sexually pure, whereas African women were uncivilized, immodest, and sexually aberrant. African slave women were also frequently pregnant. African slave women were also frequently pregnant. Now, we all know they didn't get pregnant by themselves. And if you read Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers' book, They Were Her Property, Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers talked about orchestrated sexual assault, okay? And her book deals with how in the 1850s and 1860s, about 40% of slave owners were white women in this country. About 40% of slave owners were white women. Okay. She wrote the book, They Were Her Property. I did a video dealing with this, dealing with her book, and I read a lot about her and a lot on the subject. Read this article here. Okay, let's pull that. AtlantaBlackStar.com has a good article on this. I think this was probably the first one I saw on Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers. Research by Black female professor reveals startling truth that white women made up 40% of slave owners. Okay. A set of data uncovered by University of California, Berkeley professor reveals Southern white women played a heavier role in the enslavement of Africans than previously thought. Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers, an associate professor of history at the University of California, Berkeley, combed through data from the 1850 and 1860 U.S. Census and revealed that white women made up around 40% of slave owners. This is Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers. There's a couple of videos of her lectures on YouTube also. The findings helped Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers compile her book, They Were Her Property. They Were Her Property, White Women as Slave Owners in the American South. They Were Her Property, White Women as Slave Owners in the American South. And in her book, in you know, reading about this, it caused me to change part of my perspective on how we looked at what she calls orchestrated sexual assault. The reason why is because usually when we talked about this, and we talked about, and we'll talk about African men and women during slavery forced to have sex with each other, right? Historically, the way it's presented to us is that the woman was the only victim. But we, generally speaking, in that union, generally speaking, we're not taught to see the African man as being a victim as well, along with the woman, because they're both being forced to have sex with each other. We're just under the assumption that the man wanted it and the woman didn't, but they're both being manipulated. They're both being exploited. And she talks about orchestrated sexual assault. Yes, some were related. In some cases, they would be related. It would be son and mother, brother, sister. Okay, so the way it's been presented to us, generally speaking, historically, was that the woman was the only victim, but both the men and women were being victimized at the same time. And she talks about orchestrated sexual assault and understanding the rape in that, from that perspective, but also it would take place when a white slave owner or the wife of a slave owner, if she got pregnant and she did not want to nurse her child, she would need what's called a wet nurse. She would need an African woman who was lactating to breastfeed her child. Well, if you did not already have an African female slave who was lactating or was already pregnant, okay, and is going to deliver around the time that, you know, going to maybe before your baby or something like that, then what do? You engineer orchestrated sexual assault so that you will have an African woman who's lactating when your baby's born. You're going to organize a sexual assault. This is something that she talks about. So let me go back to this here. All right, let me close out a couple of these tabs here. Let's go back to this. All right. Okay, in her book, Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers explained that white women's involvement in slavery comes from family, as their slave-owning parents, quote, typically gave their daughters more enslaved people than land. Typically gave their daughters more enslaved people than that land. Now, I'm not asserting that all white women own slaves. I'm not saying that at all. Okay. And at the same time, it's also true some white women were abolitionists. Okay. So we're just dealing with the evidence here. Quote, what this means is that their very identities as white Southern women are tied to the actual or the possible ownership of people. She said, and she was quoted by history.com, the official website of the History Channel. Her book also notes that owning enslaved Africans served as a white woman's primary source of wealth, plus owning a large number of enslaved people reportedly made women better marriage, white women better marriage material. So we know that when George Washington married Martha, Martha owned more slaves than George Washington did when they got married. She got her slaves through an inheritance, if I remember correctly. She owned more slaves than George Washington did. George Washington became a slave owner when he was like 11 years old, something like that. He got them from his father, inherited them from his father. Plus, owning a large number of enslaved people reportedly made white women, better marriage material. Once wed, white women were said to have fought and frequently won the right to continue to have ownership over their enslaved Africans, not handing over ownership to their husbands. For them, slavery was their freedom, Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers says in her book. After Martha Washington married George Washington in Virginia in 1759, George Washington is said to have possibly owned around 18 people, but his wife Martha, one of the richest women in the state of Virginia, owned 84 Africans and dramatically increased the local slave population. Arguing that white women are trained to engage in the slave industry at a young age, Jones Rogers stated, quote, their exposure to the slave market is not something that begins in adulthood. It begins in their homes when they're little girls, sometimes infants, when they're given enslaved people as gifts, end quote. Let's see, I would say it didn't matter whether the child's, okay, this is, before we get involved, is something, okay, right here. As the women got pregnant and had their own families, they reportedly orchestrate sexual assaults between enslaved people so that enslaved Black women could be available to nurse white women's children. This is orchestrated sexual assault, okay? This deals with the dehumanization. This is the Jezebel Stereotype is a legacy of what took place during slavery. As the white woman, they shouldn't say white woman, the white slave owning woman got pregnant and had their own families, they would reportedly orchestrate sexual assaults between enslaved African men and enslaved African women so that the African women could be available to nurse white women's children. This in addition to tearing enslaved women's babies away from them so that they could nurse white women's children and avoid becoming, as Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers stated, a white woman slave owner, and avoid becoming a white woman slave, as she stated, one white woman slave owner said, I should say, and avoid becoming, as Stephanie E. Jones Rogers stated, one white woman slave owner said, quote unquote, a slave to her children, a slave to her children. So you had a lot of white women that were slave owners that did not want to breastfeed their own children. They did not want to become, quote unquote, a slave to their children. Now, advertisements for wet nurses, African women who were lactating, who could breastfeed white children, advertisements for wet nurses were plastered throughout newspapers, reportedly creating a massive market of enslaved African women who recently delivered children. So what we're seeing is the commodification around the dehumanization of the sexuality of African people, especially African women. And it continues with WAP. It continues with the baby. It continues with songs like Throat Babies. So today, Atlantic Records is the slave plantation. Quote, there were instances in which formerly enslaved people did in fact say that their mistresses either sanctioned acts of sexual violence against them that were perpetrated at the hands of white men, or that they orchestrated instances of sexual violence between two enslaved people that they owned in hopes of producing children from those acts of sexual violence. So this is the context that a sexual predator abuser like R. Kelly operates within. Because as I said numerous times before, the only way he's able to get along with this so long, because if those were white women he was doing that to and white girls, that would have stopped 30 years ago. His ass would have been stopped 30 years ago. But you only protect what you respect. So when you're dealing with, as Malcolm X was correct, the most disrespected woman, the most disrespected person in this country is the black woman. And this is a legacy of slavery. All right, read the rest of this article here because I don't have time to get through all this. I've done an entire presentation dealing with this subject. Research by black female professor reveals startling truth that white women made up 40% of slave owners. This is from AtlantaBlackStar.com. AtlantaBlackStar.com. Okay. Yeah, and you had sex slave farms also. Don't forget the sex farms that use men and women to create more slaves and to be. Yeah. I talked about the sex farms briefly. Okay. So what we're gonna do? I have a lot more information. We're gonna talk about this some more on tomorrow's show. I may do a separate presentation about it. I have to do some videos to promote this weekend's class. If you like this type of information, be sure to register for the online courses that I teach on the history classes I teach on Saturday and Sunday, because we get deep into this information. Okay. On Saturday 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. Okay. So register for the classes. This is a lot of work. All this helps support the African History Network. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting. We're here 6 days a week. So this class here, each class we go through and look at approximately 10-year period of history. We look at history leading up to the Civil War taking place, starting in 1861. We look at history leading up to the Civil War, and then we look at what happened after the Civil War ended. 13th Amendment, we look at Juneteenth, Reconstruction Era, 1865 to 1877, We look at the reversal of the gains that we were making as well. And we look at the attempt to take back the state legislatures by white supremacists and them writing poll taxes and literacy tests into their state legislation. Okay. 1889, Florida is the first state to have poll taxes. We're going to see 1890 Mississippi with their state constitution, 1895 South Carolina with their state constitution, 1898 Louisiana, 1901 Alabama. Right now, actually on tomorrow's show, we'll talk about an effort to remove racist language from the Alabama state constitution that is still there today from 1901, from the 1901 Alabama State Convention, when they put that language into the state constitution. Okay, we'll probably talk about that on tomorrow's show. So we take you through our history. We go through the Jim Crow era, and then there were Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896 U.S. Supreme Court case, all of that, and then World War I, World War II, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power movement, to understand what happened to us after the Civil War ended. We go through a chronology of history, and this is a 10-week online course. Now, we do the classes live. All the sessions are recorded, because I was talking to people Sunday at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History when Dr. Leonard Jeffries were here, and Brother Taki and Sister Felicia with the film Hot Pete. And I said, no, all the sessions are recorded. So as soon as you register, click on register here. As soon as you register, you can watch the class we did this past Saturday and Saturday before that. If you can't watch the classes till 5 in the morning, that's fine. After the course is over with, you still have access to the full 10 weeks and bonus content. So next year, if you want to go through, watch the whole class again, you can do that. This class is on sale for a limited time only, $70, regularly $130. So register for that. As soon as you register, you can start watching. There's bonus lectures that you get from me also. 6 bonus lectures that you get from me when you register for that. And you also get the Juneteenth lectures, 2.5-hour lecture I did then with the history of Juneteenth. And I did that in June 2019. June 2021. You get the one I did this year. Then the second class is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So we have a new section starting with class number 1, starting up Sunday, October 3rd. This class is going to be 12 noon to 2 p.m. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. We take you through our history chronologically. We deal with ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, Nile Valley region of Africa, Nubia, Ethiopia, Abyssinia. We deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, who take the teachings from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt into Europe and brings the Europe out of the dark ages to our detriment. And we're going to see what leads to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. And we go through and analyze the transatlantic slave trade. This is a 10-week online course. We do the sessions live. All of them are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch them repeatedly anytime you want to. You still have access to the full course after the class is over with. Click right here on register here. It takes you to the next page. Click on enroll. As soon as you enroll, you can start watching. We have some bonus content that you can start watching, and you can join us in class on Sunday, October 3rd, okay, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, all of my DVD lectures and digital downloads are available at our website. So we have information here about our class, about our show, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight, Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. You can listen to audio podcasts as well. We're on iHeartRadio. Download the iHeartRadio app. Search for the African History Network show. You can also click here to listen to podcasts. It takes you to our Blog Talk Radio page. But on iHeartRadio, they have about 300 of our audio podcasts there as well. But we have a sale going on right now. Get 20% off DVD lectures and digital downloads at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. This is going on until Friday, October 1st, 2021. Friday, October 1st, 2021 at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com is right on the homepage. We have my lectures that have them in bundle packs as well. One of the really good bundle packs is this one right here is a 15 DVD bundle pack from me. In any of these lectures you want in digital download format, let me know. But this one right here, it's a 15 DVD bundle pack of some of my lectures. Okay. And just click on order here and you get, use the promo code, you get 20% off. All right. Look, we have to get out of here. And lastly, you can support us through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show. So if there are different ways you want to support us, you can do that. It helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, etc., pay for all these services that I use to do the show, everything. Okay. And this is our official Cash App account here, $ the AHN Show, SHOW. When you go to it, it'll show my name. It'll say Michael and have my picture there. These other ones are fake African History Cash App accounts, so don't donate to those because that is not me. Somebody else set that up. I already reported them. I'm trying to get them shut down because they are impersonating us, and that is not us. All right. Lastly, if you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, email me at AHNshow@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AHNshow@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. If you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, different events coming up, etc. You know, Kwanzaa is coming up as well. I also have a fantastic presentation dealing with the origins of Christmas and the ancient origins of Christmas also. But if you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, email me AHNshow@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, so register for the courses. We'll see you in class Saturday and Sunday. We'll be back here tomorrow. We're going to continue this history lesson tomorrow because I have more information. This whole thing is deep. This is why I came out so strongly against the song WAP and other songs. Negative corporate controlled hip hop. It's not just WAP. Negative corporate controlled hip hop. Okay. Right now, it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Peace.